Good morning, everyone. We're Monterey County Pops, and we're here today to play some old-time music from the 19th century, from the time that Salinas was founded, 1868. And we're going to start off with music, Civil War music, called the Blue and the Gray Suite. I'm sure you'll recognize a lot of these.
historian. The roots in the Njrotc family run very deep, as his mother is with us today to fact check and make sure that it goes well. You know, one of the most amazing things, as we were just recently talking about Roosevelt, or the old West End School, was how big of an impact World War I had on this valley and this community. The huge number of men that didn't return. And it's not just because of battle. As you will soon find, there was much more to the story. So I really hope that you'll welcome our speaker, you know, a former Marine, local investor and businessman that helps in the investment world, but also a very, very active member of our historical community, and that's Pete Njrotc. So help me in welcoming Pete.
Thank you very much. Last night, as you know, missiles, American missiles, got launched into Syria. And we live in a world of incredible technological change with all kinds of swirling political events happening all around us. Does anybody feel like the world's gone nuts? Okay. But compared to 1918, we're living in a calm era. What I'm going to be discussing is that 1918 to 1920 involved government intrusion into private life that we aren't experiencing. We talk about Facebook invading our private space, loss of confidence in governments at a level never before seen and probably never since equaled, a revolution and destruction of ancient empires. Imagine entire countries that have been there for 1,000 years suddenly ceasing to exist. Not just one, but 4 or 5 or 6 of those. Revolution, rise and distrust of the machines. All of a sudden, 1914 to 1920 dragged Salinas from the horse and buggy into the era of the airplane and the automobile. Kicking and screaming, I might add. I have to tell you a quick story. My great-great-grandfather used to go down when he was old in 1920 and hit passing cars on the corner of Gavilan and Main because he considered that they were ruining the town and they were a passing fad. So if you feel like technology is intruding on us, we've been here before. Racial and social awareness. We were all encased in a cocoon of racial certainty prior to 1914. After 1914, when the troops went overseas and met other people who were just as competent as they were, but maybe not the same skin tone or language, they came home and their whole world was transformed. The rise of science, poison gas. I mean, President Trump has sent missiles into Syria because of the use, among other things, of chlorine gas that was invented in World War I and used on our troops from Salinas. Social and geographic mobility. We saw people moving all over the United States faster than ever before, and that was a big change. Prior to this, it wasn't that rare to have somebody who could live in the Central Valley their whole life and never go to the ocean. After you got drafted into the United States Army and got sent to Alabama, the whole world was different. And vast change and uncertainty. Who believes that robots will take all our jobs? That kind of concern was rampant in the era I'm discussing right now. Okay, I'll be very fast about this one. In 1914, the United States had 1/3 the population it has now. We had a population of 2 million in the entire state of California, including everybody, compared to 40 million now. So there are a lot fewer people. Salinas had a population of about 4,000 and went to about 6,000 during the time we're talking about. But it's a tiny town. Life expectancy was 53 years compared to 78 now. And that included a lot of infant mortality because of lack of sewage and clean water. Most American adults, and this is really big, were literate. In other words, the school system had worked. These were intelligent people. And one of the the challenges of history to me is that we tend to denigrate the people who came before us as somehow more primitive or more ignorant because we don't know their stories, we don't know them personally, they're dead, right? We never met them. But the fact is that they were, around here, extremely literate. The literacy rates were quite high. 20% of American homes had plumbing and electricity. 20%. In 1915, Salinas saw its first paved road, which was Highway 101, which went right through Salinas, right down Main Street. That was a paved street. That was a big deal. And newspaper articles were written about how it was an advance and vast progress was happening. The average surviving Civil War veteran was 74 years old. Race was still a giant feature of American life. The Armstrongs, locally, had invented pump irrigation, which was a big deal. That was high tech. One of the themes of Salinas that's worth talking about is, this is a big deal, right? Where's my iPhone? Here it is. Okay, high tech, right? Okay, I would argue that the inventions in agriculture from Salinas have kept more people alive and created more value for the United States and the world than this phone here. Those farmers out there digging around in the dirt and drilling holes in the ground actually have saved more lives, created more happiness, and nurtured more people than this phone here. This is a high-tech community. It always has been, and so far it's still on the forefront of advancement. So let's keep our priorities straight here. We are not talking about a bunch of farmers sitting around the fence whittling. These are hard-charging dudes, even back in 1914. Cars were very rare. You can see one out there. They were very rare. Most people still relied on the train, which came right through here, and horsepower. Airplanes were almost non-existent. If you saw one in the sky, everybody would run outside and look. And they had one man, because they were mostly all men, sitting there on this thing about to fall to his death, and they were regarded as useless fruits. Okay, we had high-tech. Silicon Valley was already in existence in 1909. A man named Doc Harold, who was a science teacher, began the first commercial radio broadcast in 1909 from San Jose, California, in his living room. So if you were in Salinas, you were on cutting edge, you were in the front end of this technology. Now, this is very interesting. The influenza epidemic, which anybody living here except Mom has never seen anything like that, where 10% of America dies. That's different, okay? But we also saw something going on then that was really fascinating, and that is that we didn't have antibiotics. They hadn't been invented yet. But there was a parallel evolution happening that got killed off by antibiotics. And that was the use of serums, where you transfer antibodies directly from a donor into a patient. And those were actually relatively highly advanced, to the point that when serums were used in the 1918 epidemic, they had a survival rate about like we have now. So, I'm going to speed this up. 53 years. Okay, a little review. World War I started in Europe when the Archduke Ferdinand and his wife were shot with a .32 automatic on the streets of Sarajevo, in what is now Bosnia, by a 19-year-old who was disaffected. The Austrians wanted Austria-Hungary, which was an empire that had existed for 1,000 years, that would cease to exist after World War I, would be destroyed by it. Got kind of arrogant and said, gee, we want to take over Bosnia. As a result, Germany backed France and Britain backed Bosnia, and the Russians backed Bosnia. We ended up in World War I. So, airplanes. That's an airplane at the start of the war. This is what you'll see in Salinas in 1914. The man is perched like a monkey on top of this thing with wings. Things are about to change fast, and there you have a priest blessing the airplane, because it must be spirits in there, right, to make this thing go. poison gas. And I might add, here's some of that racial mixing I'm talking about. These are infantry troops that the British brought in to fight in France. And they're wearing gas masks because poison gas has been invented by the Germans, chlorine gas, which by the way was just used in Syria last week. Modern artillery was used with cartridge cases instead of loading from the muzzle. Machine guns, and of course the generals came from basically the Civil War. They don't know how a machine gun's going to operate, so they tried tactics of just marching into the guns, and the result was 18 million dead, picture that one, and 23 million wounded. So World War I was a world war. What you have here is, you have the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Turks, with the Russians on this side, and the Italians, and the French, and the British on this side, but they're all stuck in the trenches. They're all stalemated by those machine guns. And America was staying out of it. Wilson, who was an autocratic, racist prig, but didn't say that in public, he spoke very nicely and was a good orator, and he looked very handsome, so everybody thought he was cool. Tried to keep us out of the war. Then the Germans started sinking American ships. That made people angry, especially when they killed children. Sound familiar? Pictures of dead Syrian children? And the British were working this for all it was worth. They were doing what we now call fake news, okay? Generated by something that was really happening. Take up the sword of justice. This is a British poster in the United States. When you fire, when you shoot, remember this. And there's the Lusitania, which sank with a bunch of Americans, and also a secret cargo of British munitions with a little drowned child. Okay? So, meanwhile, back in Salinas, our very own Troop C, National Guard, was a cavalry unit. We're in cavalry, we're still on the horse troops. Because remember, we're big on horses in Salinas, rodeo, the whole bit. You know, we've always been that way. We might do high tech in the office, but we get on the horse when we have a moment. So we were called up, we were nationalized to go chase Pancho Villa at the Mexican border after his invasion of a couple of Texas towns. So, build that wall, right? Wow. Okay, there we are. National Guard troops to the Mexican border. Have we heard this before? Okay.
Yeah.
Now in Salinas, this is all in the newspapers, right? The slaughter in Europe, the Lusitania sinking, the deal with the Mexican border. Here's Salinas is down there. That's the Salinas River. It hasn't been dammed yet, so it's a nice big river. Okay? Nice, healthy river. So it's pretty idyllic. And then there was a Zimmerman telegram. 1917, the Mexican or the Germans approach Mexico and tell them, if you'll come in the war, if you'll invade the United States while we fight the Americans, then we'll give you Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico back. So after that, the Americans had to get in. So the whole community mobilized. Salinas, as did the entire United States. Everybody mobilized because the slaughter of war was still a little bit heroic. You know, cavalry charges. They still had kind of the mythology that this was really going to be a great adventure. Not everybody. I mean, it's not like everybody lost their minds, but still, there was kind of a heroic aspect to chasing Mexican bandits across the plains on your horse, you know, with your 6-gun. These are some of our young men who signed up and went. And remember, a lot more people, a lot more men died in World War I for Monterey County than just the people on the Roosevelt Monument. A lot of people fought. Here's a final parade down Main Street. Now there's a couple of things you can see there. First is that that portion of the street is still dirt. The other thing you can see is that these are Springfield rifles. And that means that they're a national unit. The other units didn't get such good guns. The other thing is that everybody's got good uniforms. There's a concerned father. I'd be concerned too. And this kid's having a good old time. This is right here.
Wow.
This photo is right here. Imagine, 100 years ago.
Oh my.
That's the training station, so that's right here.
Wow.
And look at, there's a slough right there. One of the things that we've done in Salinas that I regret is we've killed our green space rather resoundingly. This place used to be bisected by all kinds of creeks and sloughs, all kinds of interesting features, and now those have been filled in. Not, if you go down here, it hasn't been entirely filled in, but mostly. And you can see that Salinas wasn't very big, although it had extended above the railroad tracks, so that's something. Okay, 4 ways to provide people for World War I. Troop C and other reserve units, individual volunteers, of which there were many. There were Salinas people, Monterey County people in the Marine Corps. One of the first casualties was a Japanese American from Monterey. Draftees. So I've done some studies, and I think about 1,000 young men from Monterey County got drafted, not 500. I think they just weren't recorded correctly. And we'll see why. We'll see why they weren't recorded correctly. Nurses. Young women thought it was a heroic duty, and can't blame them, to volunteer for nursing. And when they started to realize this was going to be a big fight, it wasn't going to be as easy as they thought, they were taking women who hadn't had any nursing training and just shipping them over there. So a lot of women got into this thing, not hundreds, but a goodly number of women actually got to France. And as we'll see, they got to someplace else too. Fort Ord was created, it wasn't Fort Ord yet, but it was purchased in 1917 and used for training. Although not that much for our local people. Now another thing that happened that's big, that's going to really influence Salinas, is that here you have this town and it's got irrigated wells, really good soil, and there's a Spreckle sugar factory, and you've got the sardine canning industry over in Monterey, and all of a sudden you've got literally millions of men who have to eat. And we've got railroad transportation so we can ship fast. So what happens? Result, agricultural boom and vast wealth. So all of a sudden, Salinas is like Silicon Valley, essentially. It's going like gangbusters. Now, another thing that happened is the United States, this is a Woodrow Wilson thing, he decided that everybody must support the war financially, and if you aren't supporting the war, you must be a traitor. Have we heard language like that lately? Mm-hmm. If you're not with me, then you're against me. He actually passed a law that I'll get into later, and it made it criminal to not buy war bonds. Now, 50 would be killed. I would up that number to about 65 as far as my reading is concerned. Here's the thing, this is big. If you were not in a frontline unit, influenza and disease were the biggest issues. Dying of disease was a big deal. If you were in a frontline unit, you had casualties as bad as any of the units in World War II. I think some of those frontline, like the Marine Corps units, had 100% casualties because they were replacing the people who were lost so quickly. So they only fought for something like 8 months, seriously. But during that time, their casualty rate was horrendous because they started out and said, we're Americans, we're here to save you. You don't need to teach us a thing. Walked up, stood up, walked across no man's land, got a machine gun down, and the British said, hey, that's what happened to us in 1914, look at that. So the Americans had to learn to do this. Those are dead Americans waiting, their remains are about to be put into a mass grave. Okay, now this is a problem. Woodrow Wilson has a problem. He didn't really want this war, but he started this war. He didn't start this war, but he got it, America's in it, and he's in charge. He's the president. He doesn't like the news that's coming out of Europe. And he doesn't like the draft resistance that started. So the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 permitted the imprisonment of dissidents who expressed any anti-war opinion, and any anti-war sentiment, and communicated any news. So newspapers were forbidden to mention who had been drafted. Draft rates were not public information. So you have these men getting these telegrams, but you're not allowed to publicize that. And you have anyone who says, you know, oh my God, these people are dying like flies over there. No, you're going to jail. People were in prison for 20 years for saying, my God, they're getting slaughtered over there. A man locally was imprisoned for 10 years, and of course they modified his sentence and he got out a lot earlier than that, for not buying war bonds and expressing the opinion that it was larceny that the United States government could compel him to buy one. So the government suppressed casualty reports and reports of battles. Later it suppressed reporting of the surging influenza epidemic, which resulted in thousands of unnecessary deaths. So Wilson wants the war effort to go on like crazy. Influenza starts, and we'll get into that a little more, which is a killing monster of a disease. It started apparently in Fort Riley, Kansas. Believe it or not, it started in the United States, not Spanish. It was announced in Spain because they didn't have censorship. That's why it's called the Spanish flu. But here you have this flu epidemic raging around, but if people hear about that, they aren't going to go to work. So you suppress the news. Actually publishing news about in Baltimore, a newspaper editor was imprisoned for publishing the death rates of how many people were dying in Baltimore. So that's a real poster. I pledge allegiance and silence about the war. Draft dodging. If you dodge the draft, you're in big trouble. And they really how would you put this? They really denigrated anybody who was against the war. This man subjected himself to imprisonment and probably being hanged because he used language discouraging men from enlisting in the United States Army. That's what that poster says. You can get hung for discouraging people from enlisting in the United States Army. Amazing. And this is combing the draft for slackers. Salinas had a lot of draft, I wouldn't say evaders, but they had a lot of people who did not go because they got farming exemptions of some kind or another, or essential war effort. But we did have in Monterey a lot of hatred towards Germans, including anybody remotely, like Polish or Danish or Dutch. That was mentioned by Steinbeck in East of Eden, but there was a genuine anti-German feeling, which is very challenging. Now we're getting into the epidemic of influenza. It apparently started in Kansas. This is Fort Riley, Kansas. This is a gymnasium that's been turned into a hospital. It just swept like wildfire. They didn't really know at first how it was caused, except they knew it happened in crowds of people. Okay, the 1918 influenza pandemic killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. It hit Monterey County in October 1918. So what happened was Martin Hops, who lived across the street from Capitol, lived across the street from Roosevelt School, was killed in action. First one. So they had a town memorial for him. They had a gathering, and they held a commemoration. But then the influenza epidemic hit, so when the 20 other people got killed, or the reports trickled in months late, they were still getting telegrams after the war had ended. But when these telegrams came in, the influenza epidemic kept Salinas from commemorating them very much. Now this is interesting because this is the story of your families. This is important. Everybody here had ancestors who survived, and some didn't survive, the influenza epidemic of 1918. And it was largely dealt with by volunteers, largely women, largely nurses, and many of them untrained, who just said, the heck with it. They might be fighting in France, but I got a war right here. Despite what's being said in the newspapers, they would put on their cloth masks that might have or might not have worked and gone to take care of their neighbor. There were places where the flu epidemic in the United States was so bad that neighborhoods were dying because nobody could get up and get water. Okay? And the heroes of this are not, there aren't a lot of books about them. They're women, mostly, or men, or old men, or kids who got up and went out to take care of their neighbor. And there aren't a lot, like I said, not a lot of newspapers discuss that because there was a suppression of the news of the influenza epidemic. But we have to think about the fact that every one of us carries within us the genetics of having survived the influenza epidemic of 1918. They had an armistice on November 11th, 1918. On the evening of November 10th, 1918, the United States Army was still attacking full on because they were afraid the Germans would renege. People were killed 5 minutes before the peace treaty because the United States Army was fighting right up to the deadline to force the Germans to agree. Without public announcement, the United States Army and the British invaded Russia to prevent the spread of communism in 1918 through 1920. They invaded in Vladivostok, and some of our Salinas troops went. So one of my neighbors, when I was a kid, was 80-something years old and had a pistol he'd taken off a Russian officer. So he saw combat in Germany, France, Germany, and Vladivostok. And we don't hear about that because, again, that was suppressed news. And these are American troops marching down the street in Vladivostok, followed shortly behind by their allies, the Japanese. One of the consequences of this was racial and social awareness, and that was a big deal. These troops here, this is a French guy. The rest of them are black Americans. They're called the Harlem Hellcats. They were forbidden because of their race for join up in the Irish-based New York Brigade. So they joined up, formed their own National Guard unit, managed to get themselves sent to France, nobody would have them. So they ended up working with the French army, dressed in French uniforms, carrying French rifles, and were the first American troops into combat and kicked butt. Did great. And the American white troops who saw that thought to themselves, well, hey, gee, these guys fight just as well as I do. Maybe we got to rethink this whole race thing. And when they came home, that was reflected. When the Harlem Hellcats went home, I'm guessing about 50 of them were lynched for wearing their uniform by Southern white crackers who had gotten exemptions to go to the war because they were farmers. So the prospect of black soldier war veterans getting lynched by whites who had not fought is a reality of American history. But the lesson was not lost on most people who had seen them in action, that black could fight as well as whites. And when we come home from that, and you're in Salinas, and somebody says, hey, those guys, they're not as good as we are, you think, well, maybe we need to rethink this a little. And that's expressed in a song that came out right after my mother was born. How you gonna keep them down on the farm after they seen Perry? And that was a real song. And it was very popular when my mother was born in 1920. Was a small child. And it's a reality. If you came from rural Oklahoma and you'd been all over the world and you'd seen Germany and you'd seen France and you'd seen all these different places and you came home to your little town and you thought, they have flush toilets in Paris. I think I want one of those. So it changed the world very dramatically. Or they'd seen airplanes. They'd seen technology. They'd seen ships. The aftermath. Casualties were not fully reported or were late. In other words, people were still getting telegrams all the way into 1919. Many wounded died later, including my uncle, or granduncle. People waged a war around here. There's a farmer down south, and he talked about his father being this withdrawn guy with his World War I rifles hanging on his wall. And he had PTSD, obviously. He had PTSD. But back then you didn't have that. It was called shell shock. But it was an issue in the Salinas Valley. After all the men went away to fight in the war, who took their jobs? And who fought the influenza epidemic? Women. So all these men come back from World War I, and they're thinking, oh, I'm ready to go back to the way things were. Well, what are the women thinking?
Finally,
I fought my own war here, dude. Just as many people died here of influenza as died over there in your trench. So the world had changed. Also class structure, right? If you went and fought in the war and the rich guy didn't, who has the most right to voice your opinion about democracy? Absolutely transformed technology. Tampons were invented in World War I for use in war wounds. You had, as a result, prohibition. You had votes for women. You had the FBI. A vast change in American society. So the end result is, because Salinas is one of the high-tech capitals of the United States at that point, in 1924, Salinas had the highest per capita income of any city in the United States. How's that for a mind bender?
pretty cool.
Any questions?
In the Civil War, you could pay your way out of not joining.
Right.
Could you do the same thing in World War II?
No, no. In fact, as the war went on, the deferments, as happens with most wars, the deferments rapidly started eroding, and they started taking different people, a lot of people. For example, my mother's father was drafted in the second round, even though he had a wife and child. So, yes.
What's the high tech in the Salinas Valley?
High tech is agriculture. The Fordson tractor was coming on the scene. First they called them barn engines. They were tractors without wheels, and they were steam powered at first, and they would power the farm's equipment using fan belts. But we had drilled irrigation. We had incredibly rich soil. We had rail transport. So we were exporting the product very fast. We had rail and sea transport. And then again, we also had, remember, we had the canning of sardines was becoming a big deal. And shipping it out of here was becoming a big deal.
That's what made it the wealthiest and
Right.
all the export.
Right. It was a boom town at that point.
How do you see the future?
Confused, to be honest. I don't know. I don't know that Salinas appreciates its unique character, and I think we're set on a path that's going to make us San Jose South. But that's another story. And we are a unique town. But one thing we can do, remember the story of Martin Hops. Nobody knows. When I was a kid, nobody thought to talk to the survivors of World War II, which came, 25 years later. Nobody thought to talk to the Bataan Death March survivors very much. So we don't really cherish the stories very much. And what we need to do in our own families is cherish the stories while we got them. For example, who here remembers Vietnam? Okay, who here has written down your feelings about Vietnam? Or how society changed in the 60s, which was probably another big moment of social change. Who's done that for their families? And that's what keeps it alive. That's how we understand it. That's how we know what happened next. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mary Randall, and I am a retired administrator with Salinas City Elementary School District. And currently, I'm the education coordinator at Historic Harvey House, or as it's more popularly known, the First Mayor's House. And we're here to talk a little bit today about the early history of Salinas. I don't know if you saw the controversy in the paper about how old is Salinas really? Well, the answer is it's 150. Because Salinas was founded in 1868. Now, we were incorporated in 1874, which is what the controversy was about. But this is the way I look at it. You don't count your birthday from when your birth certificate was issued. You count it from the day you arrived. And that's the same argument could apply to how old a city is. Anyway, we're going to talk about that and a lot of other things in the next 40 minutes or so. Anita Mason, who was supposed to give the talk after me about the railroad, unfortunately fell and broke her hip, and yesterday evening she had hip replacement surgery. So I'm going to incorporate some of her talk into my talk. So we're going to start out with what was here before. So when Allison Riker and Eugene Sherwood decided to subdivide the land at the Big Bend and the Slough, the only building that was here in what is now Salinas was the halfway house. It was a tavern, a livery stable, and a blacksmith shop. It received its name because of its location at the intersection of the Monterey-Hollister Road and the San Francisco-Los Angeles Road. And it was a very popular spot on a long, dusty, or muddy, depending on the time of the year, trip. So in 1868, Salinas was a pioneer town. It was pretty rough and tumble. So let me show you how it all looked. This is the original map showing Sherwood's and Riker's 27 lots. So Allison Riker owned Rancho Nacional, and Sherwood owned Rancho Sosal. This is the Big Bend and the Slough that we're talking about. The halfway house was right there. Here's the road coming from Monterey, going up this way. It keeps on going towards San Francisco, or it turns off, this goes off to Old Stage Road, over the hill to Hollister. And then here we have the road coming down from Castroville, meeting up, and we're right here. And so here you see how the city was configured. Whoops, sorry. Oh, that's what's missing. Okay, there was another map in there. Somehow it disappeared. These things happen. So the Monterey Gazette in early 1869 said, Salinas City is now prepared to become a large town, being mapped out and staked out. However, the Pajaronian said, it's just one series of chuckles. Belly deep in sticky adobe in the winter and hub deep in penetrating dust in the summer. The one street of necessity has to be called Main Street. In some remote time, Salinas will be huge, as she's got the land to do it and the slough to drain her one street. We now leave the city if we can find our way out through the mustard fields. So this is Salinas in the mid-70s. So notice the gas lights, the boardwalks, and the macadamized streets. This is 4 years before we were chartered. So the question is, why was Salinas so successful? And there are several reasons. One is that it was a city of immigrants. You tell the kids who come to the Harvey House that everyone who lives in Salinas came here, or either they or their descendants, from somewhere else. There is no native population of Salinas. The Costanoa moved through here. This is part of their hunting grounds. The rancheros were here, and they farmed this area, and their animals roamed this area. They didn't live in this area. So from the people who put down roots to today, the people who come here are either immigrants, IMM, or international, immigrants, EM, people who've traveled in the United States to come here, or migrants, people like the Costanoa, and the people who came with the Dust Bowl, who were both immigrants and migrants. So the people who came brought a series of skills with them. So you think about not only the people who came from the Midwest and came on the wagon trains and lived in the gold rush country, a lot of them were involved in businesses, involved in city government, involved in establishing communities in Indiana, in Missouri, back, in the areas back east. And even the Chinese who came here as laborers, they came with specific skill sets. They had built the Transcontinental Railroad. They came with a whole lot of skill sets, as well as a very strong work ethic. The group had strong leadership, and they were smart. They were politically savvy. They knew how to get things done. They were able to come up with a plan to get the county seat moved from Monterey, which was a 100-year-old city, to Salinas, which had like 1,000 people. And they were able to do it by working with San Benito County, which was then part of Monterey County. But the people in Hollister didn't want to be part of Monterey County anymore because it was too far to go to everything. So they worked a deal. They said, you vote for us, we'll vote for you. That's happened before, and it's happened since. And then part of it was just good timing. They were in the right place at the right time. The gold rush was just ending, the big push, the fields were playing out. The Civil War was over, people were looking for a new start in a new place, and it was just, the time was right. The women also contributed to the success. If you think about it, many of them came west with their husbands and their families by covered wagon, carrying young children, or pregnant, or both, and walking the 2,500 miles across this country. Many of them had multiple children who they lost. Things that kids don't die from today: influenza, measles, cholera, just the basic flu, pneumonia. They didn't have remedies for it, so they lost those children. These were stalwart women. They were tough. Think about it. They had cooked over campfires. They'd worn the same clothes for weeks. They'd slept on the ground for months. And they had left their families and friends behind. So both the men and the women were people who had been through the ringer, so to speak, and they were resolute, strong people. So like their men, they had staked everything on creating a better life in the West. So here are some of the landmarks or the hallmarks or the important dates as we look at this time period. In 1868, okay, so the lots went on sale in April of 1868. By June, all the lots of the 27 were sold, and they subdivided additional lots. By September, the school board was formed. And it was a 3-man school board. One of them's job was to get the census report and go out and find out how many kids there were. Another one was asked to procure a location. And they found a house in the 300 block of Main Street, and they said, this will work for us to get started. And they worked, and the other one was to find a teacher, and they found Miss Sophronia Harvey, who was 18, and she had just finished her teacher certificate in Sacramento right before they moved here. And by October, they had their first class open with 9 children, including Sophronia Harvey's little sister, Mabel. And by the next year, they had 60 students. Wow. And by the next year, 120. So in 1870, the volunteer fire department started. And if you're going to have a town, you need a fire department. In 1871, East End opened. East End was the first school, and it was located over where Hayward Lumber is now. At that time, remember, there was no train yet. And so it didn't affect them. That was a school until 1923, when it was so riddled with termites that they tore it down and built Lincoln. In 1872, Salinas became the county seat. And that's what we were just talking about, how Salinas worked that deal with San Benito. In 1872, the same time we became the county seat, the Board of Supervisors authorized Salinas to establish a Board of Trustees and to elect a president, which they did. So in 1874, when the charter eventually got here from Sacramento, all that happened was the Board of Trustees became the city council and the president became the mayor. In 1872, the first passenger train arrived. In 1874, the streets were macadamized, or it's an earlier form of what we call paving today. In 1874, they also got natural gas, and it went to both the street lights and to the homes. In 1874, they got running water to all the homes from deep wells, and they also opened the first brewery. The Salinas Brewery was quite well known, and it was located where the Pepsi bottling plant is, or warehouse, right in that area. The building, the beautiful big Victorian where Victoria Mission has their facility now, that was the manager's house. So, by 1880, this is what the history of Monterey County says about Salinas. This is 12 years after they started building. Salinas is a central place for business for the whole valley. It is directly on the line of the Great Southern Railroad. The population of Salinas City by census of 1880 has grown to 865 inhabitants. Its main street is admirably macadamized, built on both sides in fine city fashion, while the whole town is supplied with gas and water. It has all the facilities for the arts, sciences, convenience, and benefits expected in connection with such a place. Its county buildings, churches, schools, hotels, stores, shops, and residences cause it to rank among the finest of its size in the state. The town is embowered with trees and adorned with pleasant gardens and lovely flowers. The aspect as a whole is that of a true, enterprising, progressive, permanent American city. So quite an accomplishment to make that much progress in that few years. Now let's take a look at some of the aspects of this new town. So first up is transportation. So the stagecoach ran through here long before Salinas, when the halfway house was here. And it continued to run even after the train came, because the stagecoach went places that the train didn't go. And until automobiles became popular or common, the stagecoach continued to be very much part of life in Salinas. But trains did make a huge difference in the potential of Salinas. So we're going to look at a couple of legends. Popular legend says that I.J. Harvey knew Leland Stanford from their gold rush days. Maybe yes, maybe no. We don't have any proof. It also says that he and others encouraged Stanford to put the railroad in Salinas. Could be, but that's not the main reason the train came here. So I'm going to share this map. My magic stick out. Okay. So, the train was up here in Gilroy, and then it came down to Pajaro in June of 1872. At the same time, they were building a line here over to Hollister with the idea that they could come this way to Piscinas and then the Penn over to the Big Valley. Well, they got to Tres Pinos and realized they weren't going that way. It was just too hard. It was too hard to get permits or to get the soil they needed, the land they needed, and it was just too rugged. So they said, well, we're going to persevere and put all our emphasis on this valley route. So they came to Castroville. And in September 72, when they came to Castroville, there was a big party. Everybody was excited. They wanted to go to Santa Rita, a little bit north of here, but they couldn't. And the reason they couldn't is because of something called undivided inheritance. So what happened was that the lady who owned that rancho had several children. Her husband had died. She now, with her children, owns the land. It cannot be divided. She owns half. Her children own equivalent pieces of the other half. Well, what they were doing was the kids were selling pieces of land that didn't belong to them. They kind of did, but not really. And so they were selling these pieces of land. So when the railroad came now and they want to buy land to go through there, nobody knows who belongs to what. The titles are very, very muddy. So whenever the Southern Pacific could avoid going through a rancho with undivided inheritance, they avoided it, which is why they came to Salinas.
Who were they?
Huh?
Who were they? Yes.
I don't know. I don't remember their last name. But Anita Mason could tell us, because she would know. So the next question would be, did Eugene Sherwood give the land for the train station and the right-of-way through Salinas? Yes, and well, not really. He sold, so this is where we are today. This was called Bremen Park. There was a little lake out here, just out there where the old Sizzler building is. And we're like right here. So he sold the lot in Bremen Park for $1 for the building of the train station. But he also owned all these green swatches. Actually, he owned all the yellow ones. And he sold those at market rate. So what about the story that the train ran off the tracks the first time that it arrived in Salinas, and that there was this big party? And what did Njrotc Cockerell really remember? If you go to the first mayor's house, you'll see a picture of a young lady, and beside it is this information. And it says, on November 7, 1872, the day the first train was to come to Salinas, was an exciting one. None in the village any more excited than pretty Miss Njrotc Cockerell, 16 years of age. She's interviewed in 1835. And so she's now more than 60 years, and she's being asked to remember something that happened when she was 16. So it turns out that she was remembering 3 different occasions and putting them into one good story. But that's the way history goes sometimes. So when the construction train first reached Salinas, there was great excitement. And a lot of people came out to see that. When the first passenger train arrived, it was not a big deal. It was September 1872. It was like, okay, the construction trains are still coming, but now we have a passenger train. This is cool. We're happy. When the train ran off the track was on a Monday morning. So on Sunday, someone flipped the switch. And instead of the train staying on the main track, it went over into the siding, and the siding didn't go anywhere. But the engineer was not expecting to go into the siding, and so he went off the end, and the train crashed. So it's 3 stories in one. So, is the mural correct? This is a John Cerny mural that you see as you go under the underpass onto North Main Street. Yes, and not quite. Because there was an accident, and it did involve a train. It was not this cute little train. It was a construction train. But so it's kind of true. Here we have some of the trains that plied this route. The large one, the Governor Stanford, was used. There were a lot of those, and they used them a lot for construction. So they would use it to bring ballast and the timbers and the steel girders down, and where they were building the train. And then on their way back, they would take back grain. They would fill up all that space with grain from Salinas Valley, take it back, drop it off in San Francisco, turn around, come back again. So the impact of the train in agriculture was huge, because now the farmers there could produce crops and send them out. So the sequence was, first this area had cattle from the rancho days until about 1850s, and then they started putting in grain, mostly wheat. And wheat did really well. They were able to produce 500 barrels of white flour a day from wheat from this area. Klaus Spreckels and his group came in late 1890s with the idea that let's put in sugar beets. They'd also developed irrigation, and you could water, get water on these sugar beets, and he would build this factory, and we would have it would be great. And it was. So Klaus Spreckle built the Spreckle Sugar Factory 1899. They started producing sugar, and that went on for quite a while. But then he invited Japanese workers to come here because there weren't enough farm labor, and they brought people from Japan to come and start working. And then after the Spanish-American War, people from the Philippines could come here to work without a visa because the Philippines was a protectorate, was a territory. So people came here looking again for a better way of life. And those farm workers who came here brought with them their set of skills, which was how to grow vegetables. And they started growing vegetables in their plots, saving their money, buying a little farm, growing vegetables, and then on the weekends they would go sell them in the markets. And they were doing very well. And all of a sudden, some of the bigger farmers are going, wait a minute, look how well these farmers are doing selling vegetables. And about that time, refrigeration for train cars came in, and we're like, you know what, we can produce lots of vegetables and send them to wherever we want in the United States. And here we are today with lettuce capital of the world. This is the Sperry flour mill. It was, this is why John Steinbeck's father came here, was to work, was to manage that mill. And as I said, 500 barrels of white flour a day came out of that mill.
Mary, where was that located?
Right down here, where the granary building is now, it was part of that complex. It looks kind of familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if you're going to have industry, you need housing. The oldest house, or one of the oldest houses in Salinas, and the only house that remains from the 1868 period is the first mayor's house, or the Historic Harvey House. And it's located just at the far end of this parking lot. Originally, it was at the corner of East Gavilan and Monterey Street. And the house stayed there from 1868 till the late 1930s. By then, the town had grown up around it. And the Harveys, who are now the Bakers, said, you know what? We don't like living in the middle of downtown. So they put their house on a big wagon and moved it to Rummy Lane, where it stayed until 1999. In 1999, with the assistance of the city, we were able to move the house from there down here, where we pay $1 rent per year to the city and are able to serve well over 1,000 students a year who come there to learn about local history and about the westward movement. Another style of house that was popular in those early days was Italiante. And this is the Massengills house. It was on Central Avenue. Victorian style. Wasn't quite here yet. Weren't quite up to that stage. So this is our East End School. It was completed in 1871. It was built using a bond paid by the community based on 70 cents per $100 of assessed value. So that doesn't sound like a lot, 70 cents per $100, especially when you bought your lot for $50. But by 1874, East End was not big enough, so West End was built. And the state legislature approved $15,000 for the construction of West End School and a firehouse. And by 1876, the upper floor was opened as a high school. So that was our first high school in Salinas. Now, it should be noted that no Chinese students attended public school, but there's a reason. During the 1880 census, there were over 200 Chinese men and 5 Chinese women. So at that stage, the men were here, they were working. If they had a family, it was in San Francisco or San Jose. Although Salinas became the second largest Chinatown in the United States, right after San Francisco. Gradually, the families would come here, the community would be more integrated, things would change, but at that, in 1880, it wasn't that way. These schools were used till 1923, when East End was full of termites and West End burned down. And by 1881, the school was held for 9 months a year at the expense of $5,428 per year for the school. The cost per student in Salinas City was $1.23 per month. Now it's over $5,428 per child. So books were important too. You have to remember that a lot of these people were contemporaries of Abraham Lincoln. And if you've read stories about Abraham Lincoln, you know what kind of an education he had. The Harveys actually came from the same part of Illinois and Indiana where Abraham Lincoln had grown up. And so they didn't have a deep and rich education for the most part, but they were very well read. They compensated for their lack of education by reading very widely. And new books for the 1880s were Anna Karenina by Tolstoy, Tom Sawyer, Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne, and Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. So people would, until the library opened in 1880, the townsfolk would, a couple people would buy the books, and then you'd read it, and then you'd exchange with your neighbors. And when the ladies got together for tea, they would discuss the books. When families got together for dinner, they would talk about what books they were reading. And that's how, especially the folks who came earlier and they didn't get a good education, that's how they built what they knew. So if you have homes, you're going to have institutions. And this is our local volunteer fire department in 1871, ready for action. I love their uniforms.
Look like athletes.
Yeah, oh, they probably were.
That would kind of the speedo though.
Yeah. So if another institution was the church. And the Presbyterians organized in December of 1869. And they built their first church building on Pajaro Street in 1874. And although it's gone through several different variations over the years, it is again a church. And it's still in existence. During the next years, the Methodist Episcopal Church, then the Protestant Episcopal Church, aka Anglican or St. Paul's, and the First Baptist Church were quickly formed. The Roman Catholics organized their first church in 1877. Women's club missionary societies were strong, and they raised money for ministries in both the U.S. and foreign. And then benevolent societies for the men were also popular, and Oddfellows and Masons were both started very early in Salinas' history. So you might think, well, what did the women do for work? You know, what was their life like? Well, here are a few of the things that they did. They pumped water, they cooked on a wood stove, they did all the sewing because in the early days there weren't very many stores and the products in them had been shipped all the way from the East Coast around South America. The laundry, which was done with a washboard and soap and warm water, and you washed the clothes and hung them out to dry, and when they were dry, everything had to be ironed. They took care of the children, they took care of the small animals, and they were also the arbitrators, for the most part, of the social scene. And they were the advocates for education, for etiquette, and for social norms within the community. In a few years, and not even that many, maybe 20, there would be modern conveniences like piped-in water and natural gas for the stove. And for those who could afford it, you could hire help. You could send your clothes to the Chinese laundry, or you could hire a cook to come and work at your house. But not yet. Not in the 1860s. So what was their social life like? Well, in 1868, the new theater was the musical. And the first popular musical was The Pirates of Penzance by Gilbert and Sullivan. And it came to Salinas, or it was staged here in Salinas, and that was a big deal because it's the first musical. Other examples, they had burlesque shows. And those were kind of spoof with sex appeal. And a company would come into town, stay a couple of weeks, and then they would move on to the next town. Then there were extravaganzas, like, I don't know if you've seen The Greatest Showman, but the P.T. Barnum style shows would come into town, and they would stay a few weeks. They had lavish effects, they spooked everyone, and they would do their show, and they would move on. There were also pantomimes and melodramas, often performed around Christmas time and based on tales more for families. and they often included audience participation like hissing and booing. Then Salinas had an opera house, and they also had ballet there. They had the William Tell Overture, they had Rip Van Winkle, but they also had church choirs, traveling shows, school concerts, and civic events. It's interesting because the newspapers at that time would list who was in each concert and what songs and recitations were sung and were provided. Mabel Harvey talks about the circus coming to town, and they came almost every year, and they pumped water for the elephants in front of their house, and she was always so impressed with that. So then there's the skating rink. So Salinas is 3 years old. It's 1871, and the dads decided, a group of them, that the kids needed something to do. Couldn't skate on the dirt road, so they built a skating rink. Catty corner across this, Monterey Street from where the mayor's house was. And it was a large building with unfinished walls, but good floors, redwood floors. And they had candles in tin holders that were all around the rink. And these are the rules. Gentlemen, will please skate with coats on and hats off. Gentlemen are requested not to smoke or spit on the floor. There will be no loud talking or swearing allowed. They were all directed to the guys. I don't know. So the Salinas Masonic Lodge sponsored a ball at the skating rink. This is like a dance ball, not a skating ball. But $2 a person to raise money for the maintenance of the skating rink. And it was very well attended. Then there's horse racing. They had both you would ride on the horse and the harness racing at the racetrack, which is about a mile north of town. The land was provided by Eugene Sherwood, and his only caveat was that there had to be one race a year, at least. Guess what we call it today? Rodeo. It's the whole Sherwood Gardens Rodeo complex. That was the original Salinas racetrack. And there were races all the time. Then there were box socials and outings. People would load up the wagons and they would pile in and go out to Chular Canyon or other favorite spots for picnics. That was a very popular thing to do. They had school functions, recitations, musical concerts. Churches also did that. And there was a lot of home entertainment where the girls would play the piano and everyone would sing along, or the girls would play, people would dance. Dancing, sing-alongs, theatricals, and then bikes were introduced. As soon as the roads were macadamized, people started wanting to have bikes. A big trip would be to go to either the ocean or Paraiso Hot Springs. And if you went to Paraiso, you sometimes went for weeks at a time. And interestingly enough, your visits to these locations were recorded in the local paper. Now, life wasn't all good. There were definitely problems. In 1876, for several years, there was a serious drought. So much so that I.J. Harvey, who had a mercantile store and who, at the beginning of the drought, these guys all know each other. They've all been here together. They've all built the city together. The farmers needed credit. And so he gave them credit. The second year, he gave them credit. And by the third year, he went bankrupt. And he lost his store. But that's what happens when you have a drought in this part of the world, and it goes on for year after year. Another one was typhoid. In the beginning, they were digging 10 to 12-foot wells. And so the water was contaminated by the slough runoff and other things. And typhoid was rampant in Salinas in 1869. So the McDougalls had a deep well out of town, and so they started bringing water into town. It's sort of like how we buy bottled water today. And they would bring the water in so that people could have fresh, clean water to drink. And pretty soon Salinas, that's when they dug the deep wells and then put in piping to take the water to all the houses. Fluctuating markets are always an issue, and then the farmers felt like the railroad, once it came, took control of the market, and if the farmers had a lot of things to ship, the railroad would raise the price per unit. And so that sucked up the farmers' profits. And then the last one was, there were concerns about immigration. Some people felt like there were too many Chinese here. So in the 1880s, they passed an Alien Act that prohibited the Chinese from coming to the United States. And then the Japanese started to come. And then there were strictures on how many Japanese could come per year. And then the Filipinos started coming in. We couldn't do anything to control that because it was U.S. territory. So always through the years, immigration has been an issue in this valley. So some people say, well, how come Salinas isn't more like Monterey? They're so different from each other. Well, if you think about it, Monterey was started 1770. Salinas was started in 1868, so 98 years later. Monterey was started by the Spaniards, or people coming from Mexico. Spanish speaking of that culture. The people who started Salinas were mostly people who'd come from the American Midwest and sometimes from the American South. Totally different worldview. They're mostly Protestant. They're English speaking. Who else came to live here and there? Monterey, the other people who came, Italian, Japanese fishermen, Portuguese, often, again, more Catholic oriented, more Southern European in the case of Italian and Portuguese. Salinas, who else came? Well, all the groups we were talking about earlier. And then major industries. Monterey looked out to the ocean and to tourism. So they had major fishing, major tourism. We were always, from the day one, Salinas has been agriculture, agriculture, and agriculture. So that's why those two cities have never been alike and they never will be alike. And that's okay. So Pete mentioned this little tidbit because I think it's just fascinating that during the Great Depression in 1924 specifically, Salinas was the wealthiest city per capita in the United States. And that's a real tribute to the power or the importance of our agriculture here in this valley. So we owe a huge debt to people like Isaac and Sophronia Harvey. Isaac was our first mayor, Sophronia was our first teacher. And people like Wellington Lee, who was the de facto mayor of Chinatown. And to all the migrants and immigrants and people who have worked together to make Salinas the kind of city it is today. It's taken all of their contributions. I hope that sometime today you'll go out and walk around the main stage, and there's some panels there that were created specifically for this event with a grant from the Founders Day Committee to the Historic Harvey House. And they depict all the immigrant groups who've come here over the years. And we think it's important that we remember that we all are part of our past and we're all part of our future. Are there any questions? All right, come on. Somebody's got a question.
When you talked about the schools, you talked about there not being Chinese in them. Were there other ethnicities besides white students in those schools?
There really weren't any. If you look at the census in 1880, there was one black family, the Coopers, but they didn't live in the city. They lived out on where you know where Cooper Road is. That's where their property was. And so their children didn't come here, and there really weren't any other groups here at that time. Yeah?
So you sort of answered my question too, because in the very beginning we were talking about the pioneers that came over, the strengths of the women, and the skills and the strengths that they brought here. And I was thinking about Mexican people in particular, but what their strengths were, but they didn't settle in this area.
There were ranchos, like where the Barandas live, where the Baranda adobe is. The Barandas lived there. And there were other people who were out in some of the rancho areas, and they continued to live in those areas. And they were part of the society. People were intermixed. People worked together, talked together. But if you're looking at just the population of Salinas, it was a pretty homogeneous group in 1880.
And that's the reason in Salinas there weren't any Mexican kids in the school.
There weren't. Now, what changed the ethnic mix was the Bracero Program. During World War II, the men were gone fighting the war. And some of the work women here could do, and a lot of them went to work at the sugar factory. But the field labor, they needed people to come and pick the crops. And so the Bracero Program was developed with Mexico. Mexico was neutral in the war, but they wanted to make a contribution. And so they helped set up that program that brought thousands, like 10,000 workers here. They did over $4 million in contracts during the Bracero Program. It was a huge, huge program, and it made a big difference, both in our ability to sustain our agriculture during the war and in the years afterward, and also in what Salinas looks like today. So, yeah.
Was the Opera House opera like we consider it?
Yes, it was.
And was that also where all of the other entertainment sort of used that facility?
It was next door to what became the Caminos Hotel. It was the American Hotel first, and then it became the Caminos Hotel, and the Opera House was next door.
Okay.
And downstairs was a livery stable. Yeah,
So that would be where Maya Cinema is now?
other side of the street,
Okay.
kind of next door where the Taylor building is now.
Wow.
Any other questions? We have such a wonderful history in this town. And I've only lived here 30-something years, but it's intriguing, it's interesting. There's just so much to be learned and learn from, not only about our ancestors here, but from them, because they have a lot to teach us. Any other questions? We need to head down to the main stage because it's about time for the official opening at 11 o'clock.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Mayor. How are you? My granddaughter Peyton. How you doing? All right. Checking
Let's get in the sun here.
I get outvoted every time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for the opening ceremonies of this grand celebration for Salinas, our 150th. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. Thousands of people, lots of dignitaries, and a lot of fanfare, worthy of a great community like Salinas. As appropriate, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Njrotc from Everett Alvarez High School. Please help me with the presentation of the colors. Men, let's present. Thank you. This terrific city, founded in 1868, chartered in 1874, this fabulous California Republic, and our great nation, the United States of America. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Gentlemen, you may retire the colors. Or wait, we're going to do the national anthem. So, just a moment for the national anthem, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful. You may retire the colors. Thank you. To our wonderful Monterey County Pops, to our many, many, many special guests, let's honor these flag and these colors. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to the Njrotc at Everett Alvarez High School. We have several dignitaries that are going to say a few words this morning. And to kick it off, I'm going to introduce our Salinas Mayor, Joe Gunter. Please help me in welcoming our Mayor, Joe Gunter.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks everyone for being here. We have a couple of little housekeeping that I've been reminded of as I arrived. Anybody that is related to the original founders, they have a table over here. They'd like you to sign in so that they can put a book together that has that information. I was told if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be the mayor in a month, so we need to get that done. I'd like to finish up at least this term and maybe move forward. But let's talk about what's happened here today. Councilmember McShane was asked to do a little task, put together this Founders Day, and guess what? Is this awesome or what? He knocked it out of the park, so let's give him the round of applause he deserves. He had many meetings, many committee members, and to his wife Danielle, God bless her, she survived through all of his craziness getting this together. I'm sure there was nights when she thought he moved out, but he still lives at home, and he was out doing this event. So thank you, Danielle, for sharing with us. This is an awesome day for the City of Salinas. You always hear about what we don't do. As you walk around today and see all the people involved, this is an awesome community with a lot of great people that nobody pays attention to. We feed the world. We educate our young people. Today is important. Think about it. We have a school district that's 150. The other night, we celebrated the adult education, 100 years. Our Chamber of Commerce. We have Native Americans here. We have every part of our community. We have people, if you don't register to vote, we have people doing that. We have a lot of great things here today, and this celebrates our community. And if you're hungry, there's foods at both ends. There's chicken, there's all kinds of fun stuff. But to Steve and his staff, they deserve the round of applause. But let me acknowledge, I have a couple of council members here. I have Councilwoman Craig. I saw Councilmember Bracero hiding over there, wearing the cowboy hat. But they're here, we all support this community and what goes on. So as I turn this back over to Steve, put a big smile on it. To our friends from Monterey Pops, you're not going to get anything better than this. You can't buy this kind of entertainment, folks. This is a great community. And to the young lady that sang, as a veteran, made my heart sing. So thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Mayor Joe Gunter. We have some dignitaries that would like to share a few words and present a few things in honor of such a great event. And the next speaker that I'm proud to introduce is a former mayor, a former councilwoman, a member of our state assembly. She served our governor in his cabinet. She has just done tremendous work for Salinas, whether it's housing, whether it's a safer community or better jobs. That's my good friend, Assemblywoman Ana Caballero.
Doesn't Steve look great? It's so cute. I just love it. Let me just start off by saying thank you to you all for joining us here today. This is awesome. When I drove up and saw how many people and how many booths there are, this is what Salinas is all about. I moved here, I won't say how many years ago, thinking I was going to work here for farm workers for a couple of years, and I fell in love with the community. And I've been involved in so many things for so many years because there are great people here in the city. So I do what Steve tells me to do. He asked for two things. One is that I recognize the sponsors that make this possible. And so I want to take a minute to do that. The $2,500 sponsors is Salinas Valley Memorial Health Care System and the Salinas City Elementary Education Foundation. The diamond sponsors with $1,000 is California Water Service, Hartnell College Foundation, Moe's Valero Castroville, Pacific Gas and Electric, and Taylor Farms. And then the platinum sponsors are Casa Guanajuato de Monterey County and Salvador Munoz and Associates. So thank you to all our sponsors who make this possible. And finally, it gives me great pleasure to present to the City of Salinas and to the Council a certificate of recognition from the State Assembly, recognizing this 150-year anniversary. And let me just say that before I give it to Councilmember McShane, that this site has been the site of the train station, and also the train museum and the first mayor's house. I have a funny story about that. When we moved that here, I was mayor, and my son, who was about 10 at the time, got really worried because he thought we were going to have to move over here and live on the train site. So I told him, no, we don't have to move. We're okay. But this site is a historic site, and we've been the city has plans for many years to have regular train service here, so that when you get off, there's parking here. There are housing on the site so that people can just walk across and feel safe when they come downtown. So it's still we're working at it at the state and working with the City of Salinas to make that possible. We think this is a beautiful site. So without any further ado, Steve, on behalf of the State Assembly, I'd like to present the City of Salinas this 100 recognition award. Any council members out there that want to come up? This is your chance. Picture for posterity.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Ana Caballero. Please give her one more round of applause. Wonderful, thank you. You know, it's interesting, we have a giant county. There are so many roads. There are so many challenges that face this county, and I'm proud to say that we have great leadership on our County Board of Supervisors. Representing the County of Monterey today is former judge and now County Supervisor John Phillips. This is his County Supervisor District. Please help me in welcoming County Supervisor John Phillips.
Well, thank you, and congratulations. I echo what the mayor said. Steve McShane's really got on this and knocked it out of the park, and it's really a great way to celebrate Salinas. I've been here, and this is my district. I'm a North County district, but we gerrymandered in here, so this is part of my district. I've been here almost 50 years, and as you've been here this long, you start feeling that you're part of the history of it. And when I first came and started working at what's now Rancho Cielo, there's a little town in Natividad there. And they said, well, that's where it started to develop, and that's where the stagecoach line was. But when the railroad came in, everything moved over to Salinas, and you see how important the railroad is to us. And then Luke Calcagna was explaining to me, because the train seems to be so important, he said, do you know why all the towns from Pajaro to Castroville to Salinas to Chular are all 10 miles apart? Because the steam engines had to stop and load up with water and fuel every 10 miles. And so the train and having it at the train station means so much. But I was here when we dedicated the mayor's house, and some of the people here did so much to, Mrs. Andresen was here, did so much for the mayor's house. And Isaac Julian Harvey was the first mayor, and I can empathize with him a little bit because he was a businessman, but he was also a judge. And in those days it was the justice of the peace, but when I started here 47 years ago, we had all the justice courts along, except for Salinas and Monterey, we had all the justice courts, and I used to handle those as DA. But you see the things that have changed so much too. Right before I came here, the Salinas consumed the Alisal, and you talk about the cops in those days when they had to go and start taking over the Alisal with the BNE Club and some of the other places that were a little tough to enforce. And then I remember when Santa Rita came in and part of the Salinas district as you grew. So it's been a great emergence, and it's just a great celebration and a great thing. So on behalf of, they were nice enough to give me the opportunity to present this. So on behalf of all the county, we want to recognize the City of Salinas for the 150 years and what a great job you've done. Thank you.
Move the podium out of the way. There you go.
All right.
Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you very much. Supervisor John Phillips, really appreciate your support of this. This is a terrific opportunity to recognize one of the most important parts of our county government, and that's our sheriff. Our sheriff has done a tremendous job serving the residents of Monterey County. It's a big job, whether it's the jail or whether it's the thousands of miles stretching from one end to the next. Our sheriff is there to do the job. So please help me in welcoming Sheriff Steve Bernal to say a couple of words.
Thank you, Steve. When I got here and I saw Steve, I thought, darn it, I should have worn my cowboy hat, because that's what we did back in those days. So I kicked myself for not doing that. Thank you for inviting me here to do this, representing the Sheriff's Office. I grew up, I'm a South County country boy. I grew up down in King City. But Salinas was a big part of our lives. You know, as a kid, I remember Toys Galore. That's one of the things I remember. And then when they built Northridge Mall, that was a destination for South County folk to come up to Northridge Mall, the movie theater, and it was just a great place for us to come up and visit Salinas. So my wife, her great-grandfather and father were Salinas police officers here in Salinas, so her history goes way back here in Salinas. So my wife, Leslie, back there, she was just telling me her grandmother was a great close friend with John Steinbeck, and I just found that out today, so it's great to know. But thank you. At the Sheriff's Office, we look forward to continuing our partnership with the City of Salinas, the Salinas Police Department, to continue not only to make Monterey County a safe place, to make the City of Salinas a safe place for not only the residents, but the people who come from all over the world to visit the finest county anywhere in the world. So, on behalf of the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, this is a certificate of recognition for the Salinas Founders Day Committee, celebrating 150 years of history and cultural heritage. And my, what a wide range of culture there is just right here in Salinas. So congratulations and have a great day, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this.
Oh, good. We have Councilmember Tony Villegas, Councilwoman Gloria De La Rosa, and if Councilmember Tony Barrera is here, we're looking for you. Oh, good. Councilmember Barrera, we're taking a group photo up here. We might even ask in a moment, we'll get...
Tighter, tighter.
Thank you so much, so much, Sheriff. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to take just a second to recognize a few folks here. There's a lot of dignitaries. I want to recognize former Mayor Dennis Donohue. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much for all you've done. I have to take a moment to recognize Ken White. He's the president of the Monterey County Pops, and he's also former mayor of Carmel. Thank you for coming over. I see Gilroy City Councilman Peter Leroy Munoz. Thank you for being here. There may be some other dignitaries. I want to thank the many members of the Salinas community that have been here. A couple of other folks that I have to call out. I'm very, very proud to say that the success of this year's event has been our collaboration with the Salinas City Elementary School District. The tours on Tuesday and Thursday of Lincoln and Roosevelt, former East End and West End School, the living history that the students embraced. It's an incredible educational opportunity for young kids, and that is our superintendent of our Salinas City Elementary Schools. She was accompanied by several of her board members I saw wandering around, but please help me in welcoming in period dress our superintendent, Martha Martinez.
Okay, so a lot of you talking about how Steve knocked this out of the park. Let me just tell you, last summer, him and the mayor approached me and asked me if I would collaborate with him on this event. And, you know, just not knowing what I was getting myself into, I said, okay. So if you have not gone over to the Kids Zone, that is our Salinas City Elementary School District's area. We have our kids performing all day long. They've just been magic. And as Steve said, we did public school tours at our two oldest schools this week. We are so excited. I was born in Salinas. I was actually born a little bit in the outskirts of Salinas, and then my dad went into the military. My brother was born at Fort Ord. And, you know, I live in Gilroy. I made my home in Gilroy because that's where my mother's parents lived. And so anytime we had an opportunity in between 6 months to 9 months time, we'd always come back. I have learned so much about my birthplace through these last few months, and it is just a joy. So in the fall, we will be celebrating our 150th year birthday. We were established in September 1st, 1868. Our first school opened on October 12th on a Monday, 1868. And so thank you so much for this opportunity, Mayor Gunter and Steve McShane, for being able to collaborate with you guys. We hear over and over and over again that the one thing is missing in our community is family activities. Today is an outstanding example of what our community offers, and it's free. And if you come to the Kids Zone, if all our kids, they're participating in games free. So I mean, what more can we ask for? A beautiful day, a beautiful people to work with, and just a beautiful event. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Martha. Some of you may have received a program, and I just want to reference it very, very quickly. On the back of the program, this event would not be possible without the generosity of Salinas Valley Memorial Hospital, nor the City of Salinas. Our city manager, Ray Corpus, is here. I'm looking for him right now. I want to thank Ray, and I especially want to thank the City of Salinas staff. They really turned out for this event and helped out enormously. I have to take a minute to acknowledge that this is actually the 4th time that we've had Founders Day, and our honorary chair, our founder of this event, is none other than Ruth Andreessen. She served on the county school board more than 50 years. She's 4 generations, and her son, Pete Andreessen, is right there. I want to say thank you, Pete. He was one of our lecturers. He did a terrific job. And if you want to meet Ruth Andreessen, she's right there. You can shake her hand. Ruth, to you, to James, and to the partners that made this happen, thank you. The founding partners in this event included the Native Sons of the Golden West, and we really want to give them a shout out. These men have been fantastic, and our incoming president of the Native Sons, I hope he can come down for just a second. Carrie, you want to say just a couple of quick words? The Native Sons organization's been a partner in this every year, and in just a few moments, they're going to commemorate a very, very special plaque that we've helped to support. Maybe just a couple of quick words, Carrie.
You guys are making history today. If you weren't here, we wouldn't have this. Thanks to Ruth, she had an idea, and this idea came to fruition. After 4 years, it's what she wanted it to be. We're going to celebrate history today, and in 150 years, everybody's going to see your picture saying, wow, look how they're dressed. Look how funny they are. Thank you for making some history today.
Thank you, Carrie. You're going to hear more from him in just a few moments as we are going to dedicate some plaques. I also have to call out the Monterey County Historical Society, James, as their staff, and the many, many, many men and women that have contributed to the lectures that are going on today. In your program, you will see all day long there are historical lectures. I just came out of Pete Andreessen's, the lecture on World War I. Mary Randall was one of our speakers, several speakers. So to the Historical Society, we tap your hat. I have to say one of the other founding partners is the first Mayor's House of Salinas. And I want to welcome up Mary Randall of the first Mayor's House. She is essential to make sure that 3rd graders and 5th graders are educated on our history. She knows a brief history of Salinas. And Mary, how about a quick word?
First of all, I want to let Tom Taft know that I have your wallet and your cell phone and your credit cards. I just want to welcome all of you. Again, Ruth Andreessen is a member of the board of the First Mayor's House, now called the Historic Harvey House. It's the home, the ancestral home of the Harvey family, and they lived there for over 100 years before giving the house to the people of Salinas to educate the children of Salinas about their history. So if you've never been there, we hope you'll go down and visit sometime today, and consider becoming a member to support the work we're doing with the children in Salinas. So thank you for being here. We're happy that Ruth's dream is coming true and that you all are here to celebrate with us.
Thank you very much, Mary. We have an amazing committee that made today possible. If you look through your program, you'll see the many names of men and women that have been working for over a year to make this happen. It's in the program, and I hope that you'll take time to just really recognize their hard work, whether it be at 6 a.m. or every day it seemed for the last week or two to make this happen. Very, very special. So much today. Whether it be the kids zone that was referenced, the many vendors, the lectures, the Salinas, the Rotary Club is serving beer and wine. You're welcome to enjoy that. Of course, one of the chicken dinners supplied by the Native Sons, $14. They're still selling until they're sold out. Not to mention we've got pony rides and a reptile show. This is a family-friendly, free event that Salinas can be proud of. And guess what? We're going to do it next year on the 27th. So if you'd like to get involved, come and see somebody in a security vest or come and find one of us. We're not quite done yet. We still have some more performances by the Pops. And I have to say we've got a very, very special presentation. One of our greatest sister cities is the city of Guanajuato. And Casa Guanajuato is here represented today by Sal Munoz. And Sal would like to call the mayor up. He's got a very special presentation from the governor and the mayor of Guanajuato on account of this 150th celebration. Mayor Joe Gunter and Salvador Munoz. Sal is a local architect. He's served in the historical resources community. Sal, what have you got for us today?
I want to apologize for the mayor of Guanajuato, but they sent us at least a gift. We were going to bring the the Estudiantina from the University of Guanajuato, but it will come next year for sure. And on behalf of the Casa Guanajuato in Monterey, that we serve all of the people from Guanajuato, and actually everybody, whoever has a need, even in emergencies, we are there to serve. And we do that cultural events and do a lot of things to make a better community. They sent this book that is the history of Guanajuato and what makes it so unique. The state of Guanajuato and the city of Guanajuato is a seat of, just like the Salinas Valley, a lot of agricultural community industry is doing business in Guanajuato. They embrace. Whenever we stop doing our crops in the valley of Salinas, they go to the valley of Guanajuato. And it's in progress. And I want to recognize the mayor, Donohue, for being the mayor who joined Casas Guanajuato and the community of Guanajuato to make them sister cities. And on behalf of them, happy birthday, Salinas.
Thank you very much, Salvador. So as was said, a marvelous day, great weather. We're here until 3 p.m. And believe me, there is plenty to see and do. We're expecting thousands. With that, I couldn't say enough about the Monterey County Pops. This is an organization that has concerts, many of them free, up and down the Salinas Valley. Their commitment to the entire county is fantastic. Celebrating, curating, and promoting music. Music as a way to celebrate arts, culture, and our community. So we have the beautiful Aileen Brady. She's Aileen Bradley, that's gonna sing one of my favorite songs, America. So please.
My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. My native country, the land of the noble free, thy name I love. I love the
got a beautiful voice or what? You know, one of the things about this whole event was an effort to raise money for a few special gifts, and I have to say, very, very happy that Patrick Rito could be here with the first Mayor's House. He's going to come down, and Mary and I both, on behalf of this effort, are going to present them with a very, very special gift for a very, very special project that they've initiated. Patrick?
On behalf of the Historic Harvey House, it is an honor to present the 8 banners that are around this stage, which depict the immigrant story that's so essential to Salinas, to the development of Salinas. The banners retract and are available for schools, libraries, organizations to borrow during our 150th year.
All right, thank you very much. This check goes to the First Mayor's House on behalf of the Founders Day Committee, and we just want to say thank you to all of the work you do to keep living history alive in Salinas. And the other part of this, as the mayor shared earlier, anybody that's come to this community from someplace else, we want to know. The native daughters of the Golden West and the First Mayor's House, they are curating where people came from. So go see Henrietta, go see the native daughters, and pin that map where you came from. The daughters of the American Revolution and the native daughters of the Golden West. Between the two of them, they are tracking this, and it's very special. I see Carrie and the other members of the Native Sons, and they've got a very special presentation to commemorate the 150th of Salinas. So here we go, Carrie.
Thank you. This extraordinary session of the 141st Grand Parlor of the Native Sons of the Golden West is now assembled. That may we fittingly open our labors, the worthy junior past president will offer a prayer.
If you could please rise, gentlemen, remove your hats. O great designer and builder of the universe, the master of time and space, we ask thy blessing upon the work here we are to commence. We supplicate thee to strengthen the hands of all in worthy endeavors. We supplicate, we give unto us to realize our full aspirations in this building. Make it to stand against the storm of time and evil. Permit it to endure against ignorance, injustice, and intolerance. Bless those who shall teach truth, aid those who shall seek justice, reward those who shall maintain honor. Preserve unto us our liberties and the traditions of our forefathers. Give unto our citizens courage and understanding. Endow our government and our nation with enduring wisdom, complete toleration, and eternal independence. Let our light shine upon the whole world to the end that peace, prosperity, equality, and liberty shall be the portion of all men, and to thee shall be the praise and glory forever. Amen.
Today we're here to celebrate the Salinas Freight Building. It's probably the second oldest building on this property. It's over to your right, it's the yellow building. So that's what we're dedicating. We're just doing it in front of you for ceremony. By virtue of my office, I now proclaim the 141st Grand Parlor of the Native Sons of the Golden West convened an extraordinary session for the purpose of dedicating the Salinas Southern Pacific Freight Depot. Worthy First Vice President, whence come these sands and what gravel and what do they signify?
Worthy President, this sand and this gravel were gathered from all the counties of California, from her mountains, her rivers, her valleys, from Del Norte, where the northern boundary emerges from the Pacific, from Modoc, where the northern line intercepts the 120th meridian, from Lake Tahoe, where the boundary departs the meridian to strike the Colorado River, from the Colorado at the Mexican line, from San Diego, where our southern boundary meets the waters of the Ocean of Peace. It typifies the natural greatness and resources of California, untouched by the arts of man. It is the essence of her being, the foundation laid by the Creator, upon which our fathers have built this great state.
Worthy Second Vice President, when came this cement, and what is the meaning of its presence?
Worthy President, this cement comes from all of the mills of California, from Riverside, from Colton, from San Juan, from Santa Cruz, from San Andreas, from Redwood City, from Permanente, from all places within our state where the skill of man transforms the natural rock into a needful element of construction. It typifies the industry and efforts of mankind. It brings to our minds the proof that man has harnessed the forces of nature and has wrought well for the advancement of humanity. As it is a necessary element of construction, it symbolizes the truth that reason and energy of man is necessary to bind together the elements of a society that a perfect state may exist.
Worthy Third Vice President, whence came this water, and what does the water tell us?
Worthy President, this water is brought from the site of each of the missions of California. From San Diego, founded in 1769, to Sonoma, founded in 1823. It speaks to us of the saintly Junipero Serra, of the intrepid Anza, of the patient Luzon, of the gallant Portola, of the devoted Duran. It tells us of the discoverer Cabrillo, the explorer Vizcaíno, and the soldier Galvez. It brings to our minds that still more important era when the sons of Columbia established respect for law and right without the power of force, and built here by the strength of their own will a great state. It calls to the memory all the beauties of the traditions of the past. It is symbolic of the spirit that made and preserved us a nation. It typifies the reverence that we feel for established government, for law and justice. It is here as a symbol of patriotism and loyalty. It admonishes us that the resources of nature and the energy of man cannot accomplish lasting results unless mingled with the lessons and traditions of the past.
May the resources of nature, mingled with the energy of man, ever produce fit material from which to build a splendid future. May the traditions and lessons of the past ever keep us true to our duty. May the example of our forefathers hold us fast to our destined work. Thus, with a bounteous resource of nature, do we mingle the energy and reason of man to produce the present. The present is likened to this mortar, which we may mold and shape at our will. If we have made it according to the teachings of the past, it will harden into history and will glorify us. But errors on our part will forever show in the hardened mass. The present is ours, but the present will soon be in the past. We shall pass on into history. Let our work be worthily done. To the end of our characters will make good history. On behalf of all men who love truth, justice, equality, independence, and toleration, I now declare that the Salinas Southern Pacific Freight Depot well and truly dedicated. And as our native state has contributed to the mortar with which this plaque is sealed, so may the hearts of all men cherish and defend liberty and justice. May law ever prevail. May loyalty ever move the sons of California to preserve the spirit of 49. And may California ever prosper as the home of the free, born, tolerant Americans. The Junior Past President will now ask in favor of having on over.
And once again, if you can stand, gentlemen, remove your hats. Father eternal, lift up the hearts of all men. give to them to act beyond their words, make their practices equal to their promises, extend thy divine protection to the work of this day. Cause this building to be a beacon of light and hope to all inhabitants hereabout. Endow all those who shall labor therein with truth and wisdom. Bless all those who shall labor for the advancement of our country and its people. Preserve unto us the inheritance of our fathers, and give unto our children greater light than was given unto us, and eternal rest grant unto all those who shall fall in the battle of life. Amen.
I'd like to read the text on this, so if you don't get a chance, I'll tell you what it says. Salinas Southern Pacific Freight Depot. Rail service to Salinas began in 1872 with the arrival of the Southern Pacific Railroad. The new line links Salinas with San Francisco Bay shipping points, dramatically affecting the practice of agriculture in the Salinas Valley. By January 1873, the Southern Pacific Contract and Finance Company constructed a new 32-foot wide by 93-foot long freight and passenger depot. It was built in a standard railroad vernacular style of architecture, which included board and batten siding and scissor trussing at the eaves. The freight platform was at the southwest end, the office and waiting room at the northwest. The station agent's living quarters were adjacent to the passenger space. Changes in size and use of the building began to occur after 1891. The Salinas Freight Depot represents one of 3 known remaining SP buildings of its type in Central California from the last quarter of the 19th century. The other 2 are Miller Station near Gilroy and the Santa Clara Southern Pacific Depot. Dedicated April 14th, 2018 by the Native Sons of the Golden West, Eric Christensen, Grand President, Santa Lucia Parlor number 97 from here at Salinas. Now I'd like to introduce the 2 that took part in the ceremony today. Doing the part of the Grand First Vice President is a Grand Trustee from Excelsior Power number 31 in Jackson, Steve McLean. The part of the Second Vice President was from Grand Trustee from Observatory Parlor in San Jose, Bryce Walker. Taking the part of the Third Vice President was Jerry Stinson from Georgetown number 91 in Georgetown, California. It's Grand Marshal. And then taking the part of the junior past is the past Grand President from Golden Gate number 29 in San Francisco, Tim Tullius. And when I say these names, if I say Grand in front of the name, they're all state officers. We'd like to thank them for their work. And last but not least, taking the part of the President tonight is our Grand First Vice President, who in 34 days will, as they said earlier, be the President of our whole organization. Carrie Pierce, local from Santa Lucia Parlor number 97 here in Salinas. Thank you for your time and enjoy the day.
What a wonderful dedication. Let's give it up again for the Native Sons of the Golden West. Key partners in this event from the very beginning. Plaques like this installed up and down the state of California, celebrating our history. This will go on our freight building. It's that beautiful yellow building toward the end of the displays here to celebrate such a historic structure. Men, thank you for coming all over the state to be here with us today. Let's give the board and our state officers a huge, huge round of applause. There's activities all day. You heard, come and buy a chicken lunch from the Native Sons for $14. Come and see the Salinas City Elementary School District and all of their splendor with their activities. Whether it be the historical lectures or all the activities here to my left or to my right, I gotta say, today is a terrific day. So thank you for coming out. We do have more of the Monterey County Pops, so for those of you that joined us for the opening ceremonies and to celebrate Salinas today, we salute you. Thank you very, very much. Are we ready, Miss Bradley? Here we go.
America, land far, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, wide and far. God bless America, my
Hello, Salinas. Welcome to Founders Day. Isn't it a gorgeous, beautiful day to celebrate the Salinas Valley? All right, well, thank you so much for coming out. We're so excited to be here. Aerial Theatrical is here, and we're going to be performing in just a couple of minutes. So those of you with young families, make your way down to the main stage to see a performance of the Velveteen Rabbit, a few excerpts from the show. And I've got some buy one, get one free coupons if you'd like to bring your family to the show right after this event. It's at 2 o'clock today and 7 o'clock this evening, and it also runs for the next 2 weekends. So please come on down to the main stage to see our performers from the Velveteen Rabbit from Aerial Theatrical. We'll start in just a couple minutes. If you'd like a buy one, get one free coupon, I've got those. A couple of our volunteers are passing them out. So please, without further ado, give us a warm welcome for the cast of the Velveteen Rabbit.
Thank you very much. The Velveteen Rabbit is a very powerful story about your inner worth is defined by your actions, not by what other people say about you. It's a story about a bunny who desires to become real, and the skin horse in this first song is going to explain to the bunny what it takes to be real.
Springs
really does love her, and she thinks she's about to become real. This next song is I Thought It Was Happening. This song is called The Chase Game. As the play continues on, it does finally happen. Spoiler alert. The bunny becomes real. self-worth in the world. A terrible turn for the boy happens and he gets deathly ill. The rabbit and the toys in the nursery sing about what it is for toys to love their owners. Thank you all so much again for being here with us. To finish the play, the cast reminds everybody that maybe the story is for them.
For being part of our audience today. Let's give the cast of the Velveteen Rabbit one more round of applause. Great job, kids. So again, please come and join us for the full show. It's right down the street. We're on Main Street, 320 Main Street at Ariel Theatrical. I've got some buy one, get one free coupons, and my friend Selena has them in the back, and she's raising her hand, so feel free to stop by and get one. And I have lollipops to remind you to pop on over to Ariel. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, Salinas.
Is it laundry time? Yeah. Wash time. Washing. Washing clothes. Bringing the water out of it. Yeah. this will come up and down like this. And that was common for many. That's why many people just go with this. Okay. You gotta wait. Do it a short time. All right. On Amazon.